example of labor where nonprofits are working on behalf, they're doing in effect a city function.
What I would like to begin with is, very briefly, what is you and your organization's role in funding nonprofits?
Thank you, Jim. As the Department of Community Services, we are the department that we're a pass-through of a lot of federal and state money. So we annually share about $13 million of CDBG and home money with the community to the various nonprofits. The home money and the CDBG are targeting low to moderate income families. So that's where those monies are targeted. And the other bucket of money that we are responsible for is the recently, through a charter amendment, the recently appropriated grants and aid fund, and that is another $1.5 million annually. So those are the two largest buckets of money that we share with the nonprofit community. Thank you.
Thank you. As budget director, we oversee the finances of the city, and because we're all council members, we're out in our districts knowing all the problems and concerns in the districts, and we recently added $8 million to the budget to take care of some nonprofits who have been struggling along, who have received yearly grants from the city, and because of sequestration are having difficult times. However, that money is not being released by the administration. So we're hoping it will be that these especially the ones who have received monies yearly and are depending on these monies, we hope that the monies will be released.
Well, we don't serve in any kind of funding capacity. We're the Hawaii Alliance of Nonprofit Organizations, or HANO for short, is really considered kind of like the trade association of nonprofits, kind of like the Chamber of Commerce, but for nonprofit organizations, although we act as a charitable organization ourselves. But we do track with interest and monitor the activities at the city level in terms of the partnerships that nonprofits have with city government in the delivery of services. And so we've looked in with interest on the grant and aid process, and certainly how sequestration might be impacting the flow of funds down from federal funds like HUD money down to through CDBG funds and out to the community via nonprofit services. So we're looking with interest and happy to contribute to this conversation.
Okay, now the second question, which is on a lot of people's minds, is how does the public participate in the review and the approval process for nonprofit funding?
How does the public participate?
Yeah, from your perspective.
And particularly in the city process? I would say that with any interested citizen can look into the funding decisions made by government around grant and aids or other types of funding, contract funding to the nonprofit sector. And in terms of public enrollment, public decision making in that, I know there's an advisory committee that the city has put together that allows for that kind of input into the decision making process. I don't know that I'm the right person to be speaking to that particular.
Thank you. Yeah, we always worry about public process and accountability, transparency on the part of city government. The GIA process and the CDBG monies are actually the decisions are made by different committees or task force, and then those findings are sent to the council for approval. There's not really open hearings, I believe, on at the committee level. And so when the council put in $8 million for distribution to nonprofits, we had 3 hearings, the first hearing, second reading, third reading. And so there was an open process, we believed, although the mayor disagreed and said that there wasn't this public process. But what better way than to go through the committee hearing process and the council hearing process? So it's very difficult to, we're trying to work together, but it's hard to understand why this 8 million is not released and why we're being criticized about it.
And I'm going to speak to the processes for the two different buckets of money because it's a little bit different. The federal money, the CDBG money, we procure through an RFP process. And actually, let me back up. The city has a 5-year consolidated plan that identifies the goals and objectives of the, after assessing community needs, of what type of target populations and target needs need to be addressed. And then through an RFP process, projects are selected, or actually proposals are received and compiled and then presented to a CDBG review committee. And that committee, as Councilmember mentioned, makes recommendations to the City Council via a resolution and gets adopted. It is heard at both the Budget Committee level and at the Council level. On the Grant and Aids Fund, this is reviewed not by a committee but by a commission. And the Grants and Aid Commission is subject to Sunshine Law. And so those meetings are conducted and in compliance with all Sunshine Law, posted 6 days in advance. Public is welcome, testimony is welcome, and community gets to participate. And then that commission provides a list of recommendations to the City Council via Reso, and then the council then has a further opportunity to vet out that list of recommendations from the Grants and Aid Commission. Was that the end of it? I think that was the two questions of the process. So the public gets to participate both at the City Council level and for the Grants and Aid at the commission meetings as well.
Okay, kind of a follow-up quickly, and that is that, you know, at the state level, there's an elaborate application form, all right, and that goes through the legislature. So the question is, are there application forms that someone has to fill out with budgets and everything else to get these funds?
Yes, sir. There's a very comprehensive application form. It goes through, again, the Department of Finance, Budget and Fiscal Services procurement process, where everybody has to apply and use the same application. We require an assessment of what community need is going to be addressed, a complete budget of how the funds are going to be used, as well as performance goals, requiring the entity, the nonprofit entity, to establish their own goals that we can hold them accountable to. So as they ask for reimbursement of their monies, we're also measuring their achievement of their goals. So we're not just reimbursing for money spent, but also for goals that have been accomplished. And all of those applications have similar details required, as well as timelines and deliverables.
Oh, the forms go through the department. They, yeah, because no, the add-ons, we went through just the hearing, like at the legislature when they're what is that, POS, the purchase of service. It goes through just that, the legislative process.
So this is a kind of two-part thoughtful question, I hope. What are some of the legitimate concerns that policymakers in general have about nonprofits? And then the flip side is, what are the legitimate concerns that nonprofits have about the process? We'll start with Lisa.
So I think to start with legitimate concerns that public officials might have, it might be of duplication. You know, I'm always being asked by public officials if HANO can perceive the entire landscape statewide of nonprofit service delivery, and where there might be pockets of need, and alternately where there would be duplication, such that it would inform their allocation process, so that they're not being wasteful or duplicative in their appropriations. That's a hard answer, hard question to answer, rather, where you can perceive duplication. And you know, we have many thoughts about that. On one hand, you wouldn't expect all the time, like Walmart or and Kmart to merge. In kind of a free enterprise situation, you may have two competing businesses offering similar products. Similarly, in the nonprofit sector, there can be competitiveness in the nonprofit sector, but I do understand that since nonprofits are stewards of donor giving, there is a responsibility to perceive waste or perceive duplication and try to address that. So those are some of the things. Capacity, does the nonprofit have enough capacity to be able to partner appropriately with government in delivering service? Many times nonprofits may be eager to meet their mission and to provide support to a government partner, but may not have insight into whether they have the ability to really deliver upon that mandate. And so that's one critical area, capacity of the nonprofit organization to partner. On the other hand, the question that you had about what do nonprofits expect of the government partnership or expect of public officials in the partnership? Certainly, that I think I can speak more confidently to. Nonprofits really expect complete transparency by its government partner. They expect full communication and coordination, whether it's intra-department or inter-department, or between government in general and the nonprofit sector. The communication mechanisms need to be enhanced in order for there to be good service delivery. Contracts, if it's a government contract or a purchase of service contract, those contracts need to be paid on time in a prompt and timely manner. The value of the contracts need to represent the full value of the service. Oftentimes that contract doesn't pay enough of the cost of the service. Sometimes there are midstream contract changes that happen, and the nonprofit struggles to make that midstream change in the service delivery, and it often costs that organization more, or they're expected to front reserves or front money in order to float the service while the contract is being modified. So there are some things that speak to fairness in the relationship between nonprofit organizations and government that really need to be in place in order for there to be, I think, effective service delivery. So those are some of the expectations. And there is a handout. There is a handout circulating that kind of highlights those key points that I just made. So thank you.
Well, I'm always on the side of the nonprofits. If someone goes to this 501c3 process, they're a legitimate nonprofit. If they can fill out all those forms that government makes you fill out, I think you deserve some money anyway. Just going, and I especially worry about the small nonprofits because they can't hire a professional grant writer to send in some fancy reply to the RFP. A lot of times for the small nonprofits, their executive director is the executive director, they're the custodian, they do the grant writing, they do everything. So I really am concerned about the ability of small nonprofits to receive grants. And as far as what the nonprofits expect of government, I always listen to Barry Shane. He keeps me apprised of how and what nonprofits are doing. And we try to live up to his expectations of what government should provide.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember. From the administration's perspective, I think the first word I wrote down was compliance, because that's where the pass-through for federal and state money. 95% of the dollars that pass through our department are state and federal dollars, not city taxpayer dollars. But either way, we are stewards of taxpayer dollars. So we owe that process transparency and integrity, and that's what we strive to accomplish. And I'm going to borrow Lisa's words. I think she was reading my notes. Stewardship, transparency, capacity, community need. Those are the things that we expect the nonprofits to address and to be accountable for, because we are then accountable back to the taxpayers ourselves. So that's what's top of our mind, that one, we're meeting a community need and we're in compliant with whatever the regulations are for the source of money that we're passing on.
Another point, another stumbling block that sometimes we experience is a misconception, sometimes by government, that if a nonprofit contracts with or receives a grant from a government entity, and whether it's state, city, or federal, sometimes there's an expectation that that nonprofit is a subsidiary of government, when really I think it's important to clarify that nonprofits are independent, private organizations that act on their own, and they are not subsidiaries of government. And so we like to term it more of a partnership, where government and nonprofit sector are going hand in hand into the community together to provide these types of services. So just wanted to make that an important clarification and expectation on the part of the sector.
I'd also like to add that one of the expectation of government is that we should pay on time, because a lot of the grants are given early in the fiscal year, and some nonprofits don't, they don't receive their money until the year, months after. And nonprofits have to pay rent, they have to pay their employees, and many times they have to borrow money waiting for this grant money to come in. So I think government also has that duty to pay up as soon as possible.
There are a number of questions that relate to priorities, right? And so I guess the broader question is there a strategic plan that anybody has of, in this particular year or these next 3 years, here are the higher priorities for these justifications, whether it be keep the usual suspects going, or let new ones in, or certain sectors that are hurting more. Could you talk a little bit about priorities or lack of priority?
As mentioned, this Department of Community Services every 5 years conducts or creates a consolidated plan, which includes public participation process, where we host public meetings and ask the communities and the nonprofits to come forward and share what from their perspective do they see as the needs. It could be anything from childcare, senior programs, to community improvements, sidewalks, accessibility. So those things all get incorporated into the city's 5-year consolidated plan. And each year when we do the request for proposals for our CDBG money, the projects that we fund must somehow address a need that's in the bigger consolidated plan.
Thank you. And there are instances where, maybe some nonprofits do not follow in that plan, such as the Hawaii Theater or the festivals. And that's why I think we have to look at other needs of the city. And the council tried to provide for that by adding some money to the budget, because there are other needs, for the members of the public who want to participate in arts and culture. And the mayor's office does give out grants for culture and the arts. There's so many facets to being a good city, and we should provide for all those needs, not just what's in the plan. And so there has to be these other sources of money to provide for those other priorities.
I guess I can't speak to any strategic plan by the city, but I would echo our two speakers that in order for our society or our community to be vibrant, there's a myriad of services that enrich our lives. So everything from the safety net services of immediate response to those who are disadvantaged and most in need, to the other end of the spectrum, the sort of symphony and culture and the arts and other things in our community and educational programs, environmental monitoring, invasive species tracking, all of those types of things that protect us economically and again lend to the richness of our lives. And so I appreciate that point.
If I could just add that I spoke to the federal CDBG money, but the city grants and aid fund does provide for application for cultural and arts types programs as well. And you have a handout, well, we have a handout here we can share that gives you a list of the, I think it was 134 organizations that applied for grants and aid money in this last round. You can get a flavor for the breadth of organizations.
There are a number of questions relating to monitoring after someone gets funding. And one in particular, so monitoring in general, but one in particular is when partnering with a faith-based nonprofit, is there any requirement that they keep their religious activities separate from publicly funded activities? If yes, how is this monitored?
The answer is yes. They're not allowed to teach their religion. However, so we focus on, we monitor that they're addressing the community need. And the one that's near and dear to my heart, because my former employer was St. Francis Healthcare System, and they built a preschool and an adult daycare using some federal CDBG money. So they do not promote their religion within the curriculum of the preschool. However, they teach preschool, and it's taught by Catholic nuns and laypersons as well. So as our staff goes out from the city to monitor, they're more concerned with, are we serving the children with the right educational curriculum of low to moderate income families, because that's what the CDBG money is targeting.
Well, Catholic Charities also does a lot of good work in the community, and they do not impose any kind of their religious beliefs on their programs. So they provide a lot of good service. The Buddhist Church also. So I know that the department does a very good job of monitoring that.
I again can't speak to the government side, but certainly IRS rules have it such that there are protections in place that prevent nonprofits from engaging in any kind of religious or political activity, because it would jeopardize the nonprofit status. So.
One more for Lisa, and you can repeat this so they can hear.
Okay.
Do nonprofits raise the issue of red tape, bureaucracy, forms? I wear 20 hats as head of my nonprofit. The issue of monitoring, is it considered onerous and bureaucratic from the nonprofit world?
So the question, in case you didn't hear, was do nonprofits provide any feedback about how onerous it sometimes can be to be addressing some of the red tape and the bureaucracy in the attempt to partner with government, whether it's the application process or reporting processes. And while we haven't really had much kind of involvement at the city level, certainly HANO has been heavily involved in really looking at the state bureaucracy and the contracting system. Not so much the grant and aid program at the legislature, but really the purchase of service contracting process. And in the paper that we left at the front, we do address, for instance, if you have Catholic Charities as an example, and Catholic Charities has several contracts with government at the city level, and many at the state with, say, Department of Health, Department of Human Services, Public Safety. They have, every time they go in for a contract, they must apply in a separate way. So one of the things that we've advocated for is a document bank that government might have, a repository really of all common documents to all departments that are the basic sets of financial information, your IRS letter, all of those types of things your audit, that can go in once into the document bank that various different departments can access, so that the nonprofit doesn't have to keep doing this each time. And similarly on the reporting end, because some of the outcomes that they must demonstrate to these different disparate departments is sometimes the same data, that could there be some consolidation of that reporting and data so that it doesn't have to be done 3 times in 3 slightly different manners. So those are the kinds of things that we're contemplating. An example of that, we're sitting on a government contracting task force with state level officials to try to make those kinds of IT transformations that might expedite processes a little bit, business processes a little bit more. Another great one is EFT. If your contract or your grant allocation can be deposited into your checking account automatically, then the nonprofit doesn't have to deal with some of those cash flow challenges when payments don't come in a timely manner. So, I mean, I can speak probably ad nauseum about this issue, but I'll, for the sake of time, let it sit at that.
Well, I think that's great that HANO is doing this, because when you think of red tape, bureaucracy, you know, you think government, that's government. Not only in the grant area, but permits, all of the government services. We should streamline and make it easier for people to do business. And I'm glad to hear that HANO is looking at the efficient ways, especially for monitoring. If it could be just a one-page, easy to submit. As I say, a lot of these small groups, their executive directors have to do everything. They have to do the reporting, they have to do the grant writing, they're the custodian. So let's make it as easy as is possible for our nonprofits.
I'll echo from both of them that we acknowledge that it's difficult often to complete all of the regulatory requirements. But two things that we have recently embarked on to address that. One is when we issued the RFP for the grant and aids, we offered classes to, in fact, it was mandatory that anybody who intended to apply to the Grants and Aid Fund attend a class so we could walk them through that entire application, including what the expectations were going to be in order to get reimbursed and receive your payments, assuming that you did receive a grant award, so that folks would understand how to best apply and know that they were going to be held accountable in the long run. And we attempted to streamline it so that your proposal budget and forms were going to be part of your payment request form, so it was a consistent flow of documentation. And the other piece is we just recently finished, about 2 weeks ago, some technical assistance training from the HUD office. They sent some consultants down from the mainland to look at how we run our city CDBG program and what are the best practices in the mainland. And when they looked at our monitoring report, which was about this thick, they asked us, well, who reads this? And we had to acknowledge that it was only about 5 people in the whole department that looked at it. And they showed us a 3-page checklist, which is the best practice nationally. And so we're going to be transitioning toward that very simple checklist. So it's kind of like your tax return. If you're checking off yes, you're all good. If you're checking off no, then give us an explanation why. And very much user-friendly. Thank you.
There were also a number of questions relating to the committees and offices that are reviewing grants and whether or not they actually do reflect a broad sector of the community. Are they, folks that the city has worked with a lot and therefore trust them? Does that mean that if you're new, you might have difficulty getting your voice in? So could you talk a little bit about maybe what's behind the scenes review and whether or not that aspect of community participation is broad enough?
I will tell you that the Grant and Aids Commission consists of 7 members appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council. And we did look for some diversity in background in terms of someone who may have had nonprofit experience, some who had financial business experience, and general government experience and general business experience. So we looked for a broad range of skill sets to be a part of that commission, and then they were approved by council. The CDBG committee is 3 members appointed by the council and 3 members appointed by the mayor, all approved by the council, correct? Yes, and then a jointly selected chairperson. So from that perspective, we do look for a broad range of skill sets.
Thank you. What's disappointing is at the end, when we're given these recommendations, sometimes it's very close to the deadline. And so I was told, like for the recent GIA approvals, that I would have to vote yes. And that always sets out this warning bell in my head. I keep then going to my This is America speech, where in America we can vote yes or no. But sometimes it's just too close to the deadline and we're told we have to vote yes. So we somehow have to work on this process, and I'm very glad that our new director is very open to making any kind of changes that'll work.
I don't have anything terribly significant to add, except that from where we sit, we value many different layers of oversight and represent a decision-making body that is representative of our community and of the types of services that are being selected. And so we certainly encourage and we value those types of levels of oversight and accountability within government. So thank you.
It's often the case with large contracts, and particularly CDBG funds where you would be building something perhaps, that the pure little nonprofit is not the only player here, but that there are significant architects, contractors, and other people of means and clout that are part of this process in lobbying for and assisting a nonprofit to do that, right? How does this fit in with your overall approach? How do you, how is the system trying to create a little more level playing field for those who may not have the big guys behind them, but have a worthy project?
To address the question about the CDBG and the larger projects, those types of new construction projects are required to follow the state procurement code, and you have to have a competitive bid for engineers and architects if they are to be paid for with those types of grant monies. So it must be a competitive process in order to select those professionals. I believe the only exemption to that I've ever seen is you get to pick your own lawyer without having to do procurement.
I think there isn't much lobbying done now because this committee selects they go through all of the RFPs and come out with those who qualify, and the same with the commission. They go through this whole process. There is a concern among the council members that because the new GIA monies are allocated to each district, and yet each council member has no say in what the priorities are for those monies. So we're looking at ways we can get a little more involved, and I hope we can find a common ground.
I think that's the ongoing dilemma is you have large nonprofits that are very savvy, very professional in the way that they operate and deliver service, and they have the economies of scale to be able to provide the kind of service and weather the times when payments are disrupted or there's a shortfall in government appropriation, or et cetera. Whatever kind of rainy day situations that happen, the larger nonprofits can certainly withstand that, and they have the reserves basically to be able to withstand that. You then sometimes though have smaller nonprofits that offer niche services, and they are so small that they tend to be more agile, really, and more adaptable and facile, and they offer more grassroots, customized services that government might need, but they don't have the organizational capacity to really deliver on demand. And they're the one-person shop kind of doing everything, but yet they may have grassroots volunteer, a base that can really deliver a service, actually. And what I would recommend within the, I know it's hard within the confines of GIA parameters or contracting parameters, but if there could be collaborations that marry the large infrastructure and stability of the large organization with the innovativeness and the creativity and the grassroots contact of the smaller organizations, and provide collaborated services together, maybe under the umbrella of the larger one, it might be, you might get both, a bigger bang for the buck, basically, and greater value in service. So from where we sit, again, we encourage that kind of collaboration and creativity where it's sort of a win-win-win situation between the small, large nonprofit as well as the government partner.
We've all seen commercials on TV for folks raising funds for worthy causes, hunger in Africa or whatever, right? But there's also another narrative going on about, well, what percentage of the money you donate actually goes to the project? Another way of saying this is, what is the administrative overhead versus the actual programmatic services, right? Is this an important consideration that's formally in the review process, or is that just one of the sort of things that you might come across? Is it in the applications where you look at the overhead?
And I'm cheating looking at your notes, and I'm going to explain. Community Development Block Grants is what CDBG is. Somebody asked. The Community Development Block Grants are federal money that mandates no more than 10% can be used for administrative costs. So 90% must go to the direct services. And we have informally adopted the same philosophy on the grants and aid. It's just an internal procedure, and that's what we've been applying across the board.
Yeah, I think that's a great standard, and we should stick to it.
%10 overhead. So I get the general traditional value that programs, expenses should be high, and management and overhead should be low. Having said that, I really challenge that. I don't think that you can get all of that done and meet the expectations of your partner without overhead. Overhead is something that provides the infrastructure, the very valuable and needed infrastructure for management and program to do the job that it needs to do. And you know, in our sector, we've talked about kind of the new way of thinking is the myth of overhead, that funders in general tend to want to see that at 10%, and that actually, what that says is that it's a very unstable operation, working at 10% to provide a huge bloated programmatic support system or programmatic operation, and it kills nonprofits to have to work within 10% overhead in order to deliver on the service. So I challenge the notion, and I would encourage, when you look at institutions like Harvard, they are charging 35 to 55, 60% overhead, and they get away with it because they basically deliver quality service or quality education. When you think about generally the culture of educational institutions, it's that high. So for health and human service or other safety net services to be as low as 10% is challenging for us. So,
Yeah, I kind of look at it as the 10% salaries, because there are some nonprofits that their executive directors or presidents get a really huge salary, and less money is then going to services and research, et cetera. So I just look at it as the 10% should, as relating to salaries. I don't know.
Yeah, the federal regs are a little bit tighter than that, but we can certainly have that conversation, Lisa. Thank you for making that point.
And just a comment, when you get a federal grant at a university, the overhead is like 30% or more, and that is because of the acknowledgement that capacity is related to program. And I guess one of the concerns that was behind that earlier question had to do with, if you're a mature organization and you've already dealt with capacity and you have a program, right, then maybe 10% is just fine for that little carve out. But if this is your whole gig, you know, right, and you don't have capacity, and many funders do not fund capacity, that does perhaps speak to what Lisa was talking about, big guy, small guy, you know, and having the same standard across the board could be an effectiveness issue, but that was that, okay. This was perhaps dealt with a little bit, but, and it is part of our sort of theme of the diversity among nonprofits, but are there any funds explicitly set aside for newer nonprofits or new projects that people have not thought of? Perhaps you might call it the innovative sector of nonprofits. Is that part of the mix, or is it mainly sort of keeping things going while the economy recovers?
The federal community development block grants do provide for economic development as one of the needs that can be addressed. Off the top of my head, I'm not able to give you one. Lemongrass Cafe in Chinatown is one example of a project that was funded with CDBG, and I think it was economic development. But it is one of the goals of the HUD Community Development Block Grant Program.
Well, and that's why I keep pushing for more acknowledgement, more recognition of the small nonprofits. And that's why the council put in $8 million because we reach out into each of our districts and we know what needs there are and what new groups may have been organized that have gone through the 501c3 process that are eligible, but they're just too little, too new to receive any kind of monies.
I'm going to come at it from a different perspective of how we define innovation. And sometimes innovation, the go-to, the default is to look at the new spangled thing that's come on the scene and fund that because it's the newest thing. And I would argue that innovation in the nonprofit sector has been happening in myriads of ways from the beginning of time, whether it's an innovative collaboration, an innovative process of delivery. So I think what we tend to see happen is government partners with nonprofit in a reactionary mode to respond to the safety net services or other types of things that support disadvantaged populations, however you define disadvantage. And sometimes the funding, like venture capital style funding, might come from outside of government, like through private trusts and foundations. When we think about innovation in that traditional sense. But actually, when you think about government, private, public partnerships, there are lots of really innovative partnerships going on as we speak. The Hawaii Health Connector is kind of the new thing happening with federal monies here in Hawaii, the healthcare exchange program. That's being funded by federal money through kind of, no matter what you feel about the Affordable Health Care Act, that's kind of the mechanism that it's coming down through. In land conservation, there's a lot of innovation going on. There's a partnership between city, federal, and state money to protect, to do land conservation on the North Shore through the Nonprofit Trust for Public Land. And then there's, in the arts and culture arena, the State Foundation of Culture and the Arts provides funding for promoting the arts. And then in the educational sector, the program RISE, Rewarding Internships for Sustainable Employment, is working with the nonprofit Kupu and the State Department of Business, Economic and Development and Tourism, community colleges, and the Federal Environment Protection Agency to develop a green workforce. So these kinds of new ideas and innovative approaches are actually happening as we speak and through this three-legged stool partnership of business, government, and nonprofits.
Obviously, aging has been one of our ongoing concerns. I guess the first question is, part of this is an aging-friendly city one of the priorities? If not, why not? But if it is, what is being done through these sort of grants to make us a more aging-friendly city?
The mayor has just included Honolulu in the AARP Aging Friendly City Initiative. In fact, myself, the Director of the Department of Planning and Permitting, and the Director of the Department of Transportation, Mike Formby, the three of us are, and Councilmember Kobayashi also, are on a steering committee. And we're just now pulling together the resources and going to embark on a plan, develop a plan to ensure that Honolulu is an age-friendly city. And from there, after we develop our plan, we're looking forward to some initiatives that we can fund to support that process.
Yeah, it's a very exciting initiative, and we're just beginning this. And as it develops, I believe one of your, I believe Mr. Geller will be, we're hoping to be part of this group, or someone from Kokua Council, because we want input from all the different organizations.
And again, from just where we sit at sort of a bird's eye view of this nonprofit sector, we recognize the demographic trend of an aging population here in Hawaii, and would hope that the array of service delivers, nonprofit service delivers, will respond to that demographic shift, and we support funding for that.
Can you repeat this? As you look at all the nonprofits you're aware of, does it kind of break down in certain kinds of issues, services? Can you give us a little overview of
Sure.
the universe of nonprofits and what they do?
Sure. I didn't provide copies of this, but it's on our website, and for anybody who would like another hard copy, I'm happy to provide. But in our nonprofit sector, I would say the breakdown is health and human services make up, since I'm doing the math really quickly, 42% of services. And then, wait, hold on, I have this breakdown right here. So human services, which would include those types of services, 30%. Health and mental health, 12%. Education would be 18%. Arts, culture, humanities, 15%. Environment, animal-related, 6%. Community improvement or public societal benefit organizations make up 10%, and 4% for religion, and a 1% for other, like research, science, technology. So that's kind of the pie of the nonprofit sector, but I would say health and human service together make up the biggest pie. That answered your question. And this is, I'm referring to a sector report that HANO put out. It's a little dated, it's from 2011. We do have raw 2013 data, but we haven't compiled our sector report yet, so that'll be coming up shortly.
To kind of just add to that conversation, they're not necessarily grants. We consider these contracts, but we have two other divisions, and that is our Elderly Affairs divisions, and we receive Older Americans Act money and Kapuna Care money from the state, and those funds are all targeted toward our senior population. And we also have another division, which is our Work Hawaii, where we are the recipient of U.S. Department of Labor funding, where we spend funds to develop our workforce. It's workforce development and job training. Thank you.
Next question has to do with sorting out what does the state do, what does the city do, where's the overlap? And the specific question actually has to do with funding project graduation, right? Of course, project graduation may or may not deal with public schools. It may deal with private schools as well. Do any of you have comments about, is there a certain unstated line, that's what they do, this is what we do?
Relative to project graduation, or? I'm going to defer to the ladies side of the aisle.
Well, you know, there are lines, but they should be blurred so that both city and state work on these services together. I think it's more cost effective. You know, it's the same constituents. I always talk to legislators and even the governor and say, we can't say they're state, we're county. They're the same people. So, you know, we should work together, collaborate, and make best use of our monies.
I guess I don't have a sense of that landscape and where the delineations are. I think city services are dictated a lot by its funding stream. So HUD money coming down through CDBG funds. You know, city services around culture and the arts are dictated by internal decision-making processes that kind of carve out that space. I mean, it's kind of similar to who owns that highway. Is it state or city? You know, it's kind of, these are predetermined decisions that help delineate how services or funding flows.
I think the one area that we can say that we have totally blurred the line, and that is our efforts to address homelessness and housing, and our efforts to reach across Punch Bowl Street and collaborate with the state. The city for a long time stepped back from that problem and was pointing to the other side. And the Caldwell administration recognized that this is our role to collaborate with the state and the private sector to develop a solution on that homeless problem.
I do know that from where we sit as a statewide association, where we have Maui nonprofits as HANO members, the Maui nonprofit community is very much tied to county funding. So a lot of the services, the safety net services, are really being delivered through county money, some state, but the landscape looks a little different from island to island.
I want to ask a question about trends and unstated rules. Recently, it's been observed that both for the state and city funding, that decision makers want to know that they're not the first to fund the project and that you have cash in hand or commitments in hand. But the foundations have also adopted the same approach. We don't want to be first. So this has become a catch-22 trend in seeking funds. And I wonder if you want to comment on that or any other trends you've sort of observed.
We can acknowledge that is in fact true. As stewards of taxpayer dollars, we don't want to be the first in because it represents the highest risk. So one of the ways we've been discussing internally to address that is to provide a conditional award so that folks can know that they've got a commitment, but they need to come to the table with their other funding before we actually release our money. So we can make that commitment contingent on additional monies being funded toward the project. So once they achieve a certain goal of funding, then we can release the monies. And it's just a new idea that we've been kicking around to address that concern.
I'm not aware of that. I just, you know, sometimes government processes just kind of, you know, give me a headache because they're just so, there's things that happen that you just never think of and you wonder how this developed. So the bottom line is we just got to keep moving forward, trying to work together, and who cares what happens as long as there's a solution and services are provided.
Again, I'm going to toot the horn for collaboration. So if a small nonprofit that's an unknown quantity is really looking to get its foot in the door with a funder, perhaps that's a good opportunity to approach a larger, well-established nonprofit that has a funding history with a government partner and offer, again, that very customized grassroots expertise that only it can do because it's so small and community-based. And again, this larger nonprofit is really needing that service as a complement to its service. But using the leverage of that larger nonprofit and the reputation and the credibility to get a foothold, demonstrate success, and then maybe the funding entity, whether it's a government entity or a private trust and foundation, will be willing next time to be the first in for that smaller nonprofit. There was another point I was going to make about being the first in. Jim asked a question about what are some new models around that. There is a concept called social impact bonds that are fairly new to our sector, and this is kind of wild, and it hasn't been demonstrated. I think the first known case came out of England, and it's still being tested, but it's where a venture capital group will come in and actually provide the front-end investment for a nonprofit's operations to provide a certain very specific service that is measurable and has demonstrated outcomes. If that nonprofit organization with that front-end investment is able to actually lower, in this case, like incidences of recidivism to prison amongst youth, youth inmates or something, if they're able to actually reduce incidences of recidivism, then the government partner agrees to pay the venture capitalists back with interest. But with the notion that government is going to begin to enjoy effectiveness, cost effectiveness to the program, and will not have to keep funding the same nonprofit, the same amount every year for no outcome. So if the nonprofit is successful, then everybody wins. It's kind of a wild idea. Rare in this day and age is there a venture capitalist who's going to take that risk, but they're trying to test this through this concept called the social impact bond.
Speaking of partnerships, someone asked a question about the issue of safety and seniors crossing the street. You know, we try to do highly expensive things with the light and the longer crosswalk and whatnot. But what about funding ARP or someone to have an escort across the street service, the way many private schools and others do? You know, they have parents and they escort the kids across the crosswalks. Has there been any thought about utilizing the nonprofit sector to create a more a safer environment that might be kind of more expensive to deal with technologically?
It seems it would be an appropriate grant and aid application for a nonprofit that wanted to undertake that community need. They could certainly apply for those funds.
I remember growing up, we had these junior police officers, and it was such a, you know, honor to be able to stand there, and you have like some sort of helmet or something and a whistle and a sign that says stop, and you help people cross the street. I don't know what happened to groups like that, but yeah, certainly I echo the director's plea that if there is someone out there who would like to apply for an RFP for that service, we'd certainly look at it.
Again, a different take on this issue is it illustrates an innovative and yet very simple and kind of old school program like that actually could be done best through volunteers. And so I don't think nonprofits utilize the volunteer base enough. And I think from where HANO sits is we're trying to look at the sector and see where we can be most leverage all the resources that are available to us in the sector. Are we encouraging nonprofits to spend wisely, to utilize resources wisely? You know, it's our value to encourage our members and our constituency to maximize and utilize to the best of their ability all of the resources at hand. And having said that, I don't think volunteerism is not being utilized to the extent that it could be. As an offshoot, not related to the JPOs, is we recognize that there is a senior contingency, the baby boomer crowd that is retiring, that has so much to still give in expertise, knowledge, and often it has kind of the wisdom of having been in the workforce for a long time, and still can bring that to bear in the nonprofit sector. And what we're contemplating is facilitating a little bit more of that kind of exchange of a matchmaking, baby boomer expertise or retiree expertise, and via whether it's paid consultancy or volunteer based, trying to match resources up that way.